Part 26. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 251. Chapter 251. What a coincidence. Princess Heshuo County was already about to go to bed when she received the letter from Ningan. However, when she saw the instructions and pleas in the letter, all her sleepiness disappeared without a trace in an instant. She already knew that Xiao Qinjiao was traveling to Xianbei, and Prince Heshuo never hid anything from her, so how could she not know how dangerous the road ahead of Xiao Qinjiao was? Looking at the letter in her hand again, the princess of Heshuo County felt bad. This child, Xiao Qinjiao. I'm afraid I'm giving my final instructions before I die. Seeing that the princess's eyes were red, Prince Heshuo hurriedly walked over and asked, "What's wrong with you?" Princess Heshuo angrily slapped the letter in her hand on Prince Heshuo's belly. "Look at the good things you people have done. If something happens to little Qinjiao this time, I will never forgive you for the rest of my life." Heshuo County Prince. What does it have to do with him? Looking at the letter by the candlelight in the room, Prince Heshuo was silent for a long time. Facing the disaster, Fan Qinjiao can still have this filial piety. She is indeed the goddaughter he recognized. Prince Heshuo suppressed the sadness in his heart and said, "Since the child has asked us to come here, he can trust you and me. If this is Xiao Qinjiao's only wish, we will do our best no matter what." Princess Heshuo County snuggled into her husband's arms. "Leave this matter to me, but you must promise me that no matter what, you will try your best to protect Xiao Qinjiao Zhouquan during this trip to Xianbei." Heshuo County Prince nodded, but his heart was even more sad. If the king wants his minister to die, he must die. Who can escape the emperor's butcher's knife? Early the next morning, Hua Yuelian received a post from the princess of Heshuo County. Hua Yuelian was always grateful and respectful to Princess Heshuo County, so she didn't even think about it and took Fan Qinjiao out half an hour later. The place for this meeting was set at a place called Tangyun Ziazu. This tea house has existed for nearly 100 years, and it is also very famous in a place like the main city where land is very expensive. Fan Qinjiao had heard of this place before, but it was from Ziwiling and Fan Swining. In the last life, the mother and daughter used her to seduce the powerful people in the main city and lingered here all day long. Fan Qinjiao knew that his adoptive mother would definitely help, but he did not expect that he would bleed so heavily. Princess Heshuo had already arrived at the tea house. When she saw Hua Yuelian and Fan Qinjiao, she stood up on her own initiative. Hua Yuelian looked at Princess Heshuo's slightly bulging belly and quickly stepped forward to help Princess Heshuo sit firmly. "I heard that little Qinjiao will be traveling with the team in the future, so I just wanted to see little Qinjiao in advance, and I hope my sister won't feel disturbed." Princess Heshuo held Hua Yuelian's hand. Hands, eyebrows full of smiles. Hua Yuelian looked at Princess Heshuo's belly and wondered whether to laugh or cry. "We are so light, why bother? It's hard for my sister to be so worried about you yet, even though she is pregnant with a child. I think back when Fan Qinjiao was imprisoned in the Huguo Temple, the princess of Heshuo County was always by Hua Yuelian's side, and they could be regarded as sharing the same joys and sorrows. Now the two of them are not that open to each other, and they are chatting lively." Fan Qinjiao, on the other hand, sat silently on the side, thinking constantly in his heart. In the letter, she asked her adoptive mother to help her mother and son Che. Unexpectedly, her adoptive mother was straightforward and brought them here. In this way, Fan Qinjiao's head suddenly started to hurt. "My mother lives in the backyard, but she is not stupid. If there really was an accidental encounter, how could she not see that there was something wrong with it?" Fan Qinjiao looked at the princess of Heshuo County pleadingly, hoping that it would not be what he thought. Princess Heshuo County secretly gave her a reassuring look. Result: Sun Che's carriage was parked outside the tea house. The princess of Heshuo County pretended to be surprised and said, "Isn't that Governor's son? It's really destined." Fan Kinjao. The meaning of fate described by the stepmother is so blunt that it makes one's teeth hurt. Sun Che had already learned the reason from Prince Heshuo, or in other words, the reason why he was standing here now was entirely because he was escorted by Prince Heshuo, so he got off the carriage and went directly to the second floor. Your Majesty, please give my regards to the Princess of Heshuo County. Sun Che hurriedly bowed to say hello, and then looked at Huayuelian aside, his eyes apologetic. He did not want to deceive Huayuelian by unfair means, but he did not want to refuse. He accepted the kindness of Heshuo County Prince and his wife. Huayuelian smiled naturally. Master Sun, please sit down. Sun Che was busy sitting down across from him, but he was very reserved. Huayuelian didn't know Sun Che's feelings for her, it was because she knew that she kept avoiding them. Now she is an abandoned wife. How can she be worthy of Sun Che, who has never been married and has a bright future? Moreover, the Hua family is unstable now. How can she be willing to let her daughter carry all this alone? So the fault is not with Sun Che, but with herself. Huayuelian was grateful for Princess Heshuo's intentions, and even more grateful for Sun Che's concern, so she always took the initiative to talk to Sun Che. Sun Che gradually became less reserved, and the atmosphere finally relaxed. The sound of footsteps sounded from the stairs. The waiter shouted, "Please come in, ladies." Then, a few people sat at the next table. The hair oil Mrs. Fan has put on her hair tastes good and its luster is dazzling. I wonder who she bought it from. If the ladies don't dislike the new products from Kingnanzai, I will personally send some to you some other day. I heard that Kingnanzai was a business of Princess Jingping. I still didn't believe it, but now it seems to be true. Princess Jingping is just a title given by the emperor's kindness. If we want to talk about it, her mother is just a divorced wife of our Fan family. To put it bluntly, Princess Jingping is just a concubine. Fan Kinjao paused while stroking the teacup. There are many people in the city who hate her, but there are also very few who keep talking about her past. So the person next door who was stepping on her and talking so loudly already knew who he was without even seeing her. Huayuelian's face didn't look good either, and she couldn't keep the smile on her face. She was once the one who took the wrong path. You can say whatever you want about her, but why do you want to violate her crescent moon like this? Princess Heshuo County looked at Huayuelian's face and put down the teacup in her hand. But before Heshuo County Princess could ask her questions carefully, she suddenly heard someone shouting from next door, "Ouch! Heshuo County Princess is here too." There was a sound of rustling, and several people who had just sat down next door got up and walked towards the side. The dignitaries in the main city are divided into factions, and the female relatives in the backyard are also clearly divided. At this moment, these women are all well-known aristocratic ladies in the main city. They are rich and powerful. It is not an exaggeration to say that they can do whatever they want among the female relatives of the main city. But the only exception was the familiar face standing next to them. Fan Kinjao saw that face at a glance, and gently twitched the corners of his lips. I didn't know that Aunt Ziyiling, who climbed to the position of First Lady after Fan Mansion, was so powerful. Ziyiling never expected to meet Huayuelian and Fan Kinjao in such a famous place, and her expressions were extremely ugly. Seeing this, several other powerful ladies looked at the Princess of Heshuo County in confusion. The Princess of Heshuo County already understood Ziyiling's identity and had no intention of giving in. "Please forgive me, I am a righteous daughter who can't get rid of the dust in her eyes, let alone a little ant who can show off her power here. Have to." Now everyone present knows the identities of Fan Kinjao and Huayuelian. The ladies present did not dare to offend the Princess of Heshuo County, so they quickly looked at Ziyiling and scolded her. "How many times have I told you, you should pay attention to your words and deeds when you are with us, and don't put those things on the table. Mesa, if you just don't listen, why don't you go and confess your mistake to Princess Jingping?" Zy Ling had long heard that Prince Heshuo had recognized his goddaughter, but she just thought it was just for fun. She never expected that Princess Heshuo would be so doting on the mother and daughter who had once been stepped on by her. Secretly clenching his teeth, Zy Ling was clearly filled with hatred, but he still lowered his head and said, "I am speaking without restraint. Please don't mind Princess Jingping." Fan Qinjiao felt cold in his heart when he saw Zy Ling's hypocritical way of admitting her mistake. Just because her mother was present, she didn't want her mother to see her cruel side, so she withdrew her gaze and continued drinking tea. One of the ladies looked at Hua Yulian with a busy smile and said, "The woman sitting next to Princess Heshuo County has a pretty face. I don't know what to call her." The Princess of Heshuo County had no intention of avoiding it. "Soon you will be called the governor's wife." "What?" Zy Ling raised his head in disbelief. The shock and jealousy in his eyes were self-evident. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 252. Chapter 252, In the face of life and death, human nature is so evil. Hua Yuelian and Sun Che also didn't expect Princess Heshuo to be so straightforward. For a while, they were stunned in their seats and didn't know how to react. But both Hua Yuelian and Sun Che knew that since the Princess of Heshuo County had spoken, there was no reason to veto it. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a slap in the face of the Princess of Heshuo County? The ladies were also shocked when they heard this. Although Sun Che is only a small governor, he has a good reputation and is popular among the people. Even the emperor has praised him countless times. I am afraid that his future will be absolutely unlimited. Several ladies present who originally wanted to find an opportunity to match their daughters with the Sun family had no choice but to give up their thoughts. After all, no one dared to compete with the people protected by Princess Heshuo County. Zy Ling was stunned and froze in place as if struck by lightning. She is the best at being hypocritical and submissive, but now she can't even say compliments. The ladies exchanged a few polite words with the Princess of Heshuo County, then turned around and returned to the next door. Zy Ling pretended not to be affected by anything and sat beside the ladies drinking tea, but even she couldn't tell what the tea in her mouth tasted like. Not only did Fan Qinjiao, a bastard, become the Princess of Qingping County, but now even Hua Yuelian, a lowly servant, is going to become the governor's wife. But what about herself? Occupied everything that once belonged to Hua Yulian and her daughter, but now they are watching people's actions and relying on others. How can Zy Ling not hate you? She will hate it to death. Holding the teacup in her hand, Zy Ling kept comforting herself that it was okay, as long as she endured it a little longer, she would be able to stand up completely. Fan Qinjiao looked at the drunkard next door who was as stiff as a stone statue, consciously or unconsciously, and his mind wandered. Judging from the clothes of those ladies, they definitely did not belong to ordinary noble families. Although Zy Ling followed those people cautiously, but based on Zy Ling's identity, or based on her current status in the Fan family, she wanted to blend in among those ladies. It is simply a fantasy. But those ladies just gave Zy Ling a place, which shows that Zy Ling has something to worry about. It's not Fan Mansion, it's not Fan Zixiu, it's not Fan Yurong. Then only Fan Swinning is left. It seems that Fan Swinning is not only really coming back, but also doing well. It's a pity. If she can't return to the main city this time, she will miss the opportunity to fight Fan Swinning. It is true that I am unwilling to give in. It is also true to say hate. Suddenly, the teacup on the table shook. Fan Qinjiao gathered his thoughts and raised his eyes to see Princess Heshuo County secretly looking at her with a smile on her face. Thinking about the shaking just now, Fan Qinjiao quietly came over and said, "My stepmother is really good at it." The Princess of Heshuo County raised her lips proudly. "I will definitely handle the things my daughter tells me carefully." Fan Qinjiao was full of gratitude. Originally, I was a stepmother who simply attracted Uncle Sun, pretended to meet my mother by chance, and then deepened our relationship. However, I didn't expect that the stepmother actually used hidden means to shake up the tea house and planned to make Uncle Sun the hero saves the beauty, but I misunderstood my adoptive mother. How could my adoptive mother do such a vulgar thing with her pure heart? The smile on Princess Heshuo's face was a little stiff. Although she didn't want to admit it, she still had no choice but to say, I really just want to find a reason for your mother to meet Sun Che by chance. So, she is so vulgar and unconventional. Fan Kinjao was stunned, and his dark eyes darkened. If the shaking just now was not caused by the stepmother, then... At this moment, the teacup on the table started shaking again. The shaking this time was obviously more obvious than before, and the dust on the wooden building was shaken off. Fan Kinjao immediately took the hand of Princess Heshuo and looked at Sun Che and his mother. Let's go. Sun Che quickly picked up Hua Yuelian, and they hurried toward the stairs. Boom 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 dash. The shaking of the entire tea house became more and more obvious, and even the people on the street began to stop and watch. Needless to say, the guests in the tea house were already running towards the door in panic. Zy Ling followed the other ladies and ran towards the stairs screaming. In the face of life and death, human nature is evil. The ladies who just nodded and bowed to the Princess of Heshuo County, now faced the Princess of Heshuo County who was holding her stomach and walking slowly, without even looking at her. The staircase, which was originally quite spacious, suddenly seemed extremely crowded. Zy Ling, who was following closely among the ladies, saw Princess Heshuo County occupying the path of two people. Without thinking, she stretched out her hand and pushed Princess Heshuo County. Princess Heshuo held her belly and leaned forward instantly. Fan Kinjao, who could have walked downstairs with Princess Heshuo, had to stop and steady Princess Heshuo. At this time, the second floor of the tea house began to collapse, and wooden beams fell from above one after another. Crescent moon. Hua Yuelian, who had followed Sun Che to the first floor, turned back to look at Fan Kinjao who was standing on the second floor, without even thinking about going back. Fan Kinjao looked at Sun Che, who was standing behind his mother, and said in a sharp voice, "Take my mother away." Sun Che was stunned. He couldn't believe that someone with such an unflappable spirit could be a little girl who hadn't even had haircuts yet. Hua Yulian had already walked back to the second floor. The person who was still running down crazily almost knocked her unconscious, but she held onto the handrail and refused to let go. Her crescent moon was still on it. My daughter cannot live without her. Boom. The collapse of the second floor continues. Fan Kinjao looked at Sun Che again and said, "Master Sun, I leave my mother to you, don't let me down." Sun Che looked at the second floor, which had been smashed to its original state, and rushed to Hua Yuelian's side. Ignoring Hua Yuelian's struggle, he forcibly held her in his arms, turned around and ran outside. The guests upstairs and downstairs have almost run away. Only Fan Kinjao was still supporting the Princess of Heshuo County as she walked downstairs step by step. Princess Heshuo County's eyes were red, and she spoke several times, "Xiao Kinjao, leave quickly. Leave me alone, otherwise none of us will be able to get out of here." Fan Kinjao's expression did not change, and he did not let go of Princess Heshuo's hand. "Father, be careful where you step, we will be on the first floor soon." She owed the lives of too many people in her last life. She will never watch anyone who gives her warmth die in vain in this life. Princess Heshuo felt the warmth from her hands, her heart was filled with soreness and she didn't know what else to say, so she could only follow Fan Kinjao and continue walking downstairs step by step. Finally reaching the first floor, Princess Heshuo breathed a sigh of relief, and her heavy steps became a little lighter. Just as she was about to reach the door, Princess Heshuo turned her head to look at Fan Kinjao and smiled gratefully, "Little Kinjao." Of course. Before he could finish his words, The crumbling first floor finally collapsed instantly due to uneven force. Fan Kinjao instinctively pushed Princess Heshuo to the door. Boom, boom. The loud roar was deafening. After a burst of dust and smoke, the Tangyun building that had stood in the main city for 100 years completely collapsed. The Princess of Heshuo County looked back at the ruins where even the doors and windows could not be distinguished. She burst into tears on the spot. Little Kinjao. Having just settled Huayuelian, Sun Che was about to rush into the tea house again, but when he turned around, he was shocked. Huayuelian stood up like crazy and wanted to rush inside. You yatter. You yatter dash. Sun Che hugged Huayuelian tightly, who was looking like a madman, and hurriedly called to the boy guarding the carriage, go back to the yamen and call for someone. Then let the master enter the palace quickly to ask the emperor for help, and tell Princess Jingping still inside. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 253. Chapter 253, If the disease is not cured for a long time, there is no cure. Sun Che's driver had already driven away in his carriage. The Princess of Heshuo County looked at her coachman and said, quick. Go to the palace and call Prince Jun and ask him to come with his men. Tangyun's small building collapsed into ruins, but those who survived the disaster had no time to release even a trace of joy. They stared blankly at the screams of Princess Heshuo County and Governor Sun, which were loud in the sky, and they were sluggishly digesting a question. Princess Jingping. It was smashed inside. Huayulian was so frightened that she no longer had the strength to stand, but she had to crawl down to the ruins no matter how hard she crawled. Her crescent moon is still there, her crescent moon is still waiting for her. The ladies who had escaped death calmed down and gathered around the Princess of Heshuo County, hypocritically talking about mourning and surrendering, as is the case for the living. The Princess of Heshuo County pushed away the hot-tongued women in front of her, looked at the ruins hoarsely and shouted tirelessly, Little Kinjao, Little Kinjao. Zy Ling stood indifferently with the saved people, looking at the ruins in front of him and saying he wasn't excited would be a lie. Fan Kinjao is really dead. In this case, once her daughter comes back. Some sound suddenly sounded from far to near. Everyone followed the sound and looked around, only to see a neat column of troops coming towards the side quickly. A carriage disappeared and appeared among the team. As the team stopped in front of everyone's eyes, when the door of the carriage slowly opened, everyone looked at the people who got off the carriage, and they all knelt on the ground in confusion. Tangyun's small building collapsed, pushing out the surrounding air. Fan Kinjao huddled under a wooden beam that was only about an inch long, breathing carefully. She could hear her stepmother's screams, and even her mother's cries, but she couldn't answer. Both the top of her head and her surroundings were still crumbling. If she screamed at this time, she would probably continue to cause subsequent collapses. Those who study medicine can save others but also know how to save themselves. In order to keep enough air around him, Fan Kinjao tried his best to breathe calmly and shallowly. Tangyun Xiaozutan is a famous tea house in the main city. Such a tea house with a century-old history will be renovated and consolidated every month. Otherwise, if something like today happens, even if you can afford to pay for it, you cannot afford to lose your reputation. Even if it is a famous tea house, no one dares to drink it with their life. Fan Kinjao was conscious and carefully recalled every step he took when entering the tea house. Although the floor is old, the red paint is bright, and it is obvious that it was recently renovated. Moreover, she followed her mother from the first floor to the second floor. The floor she walked on was solid, and there was no sound at all. If a long-term illness is not cured, there is no cure. How can all the ice become cold in one day? Unless It was someone who did it on purpose. Fan Kinjao's heart suddenly tightened. Soon, a faint beam of light appeared in front of his eyes. A slender and beautiful hand in the impression slightly spread its fingers in front of her eyes. But at this moment, the white hands were covered with blood stains, and the plump fingertips were even more bloody. The weak light was getting brighter little by little. The short darkness made Fan Kinjao unable to look directly at the strong light. He subconsciously turned his cheek to the side, but felt that the hand was getting closer to him, and the fingertips covered with blood lightly touched him. Gently rub it on her forehead. Gradually, a tall figure walked into the ruins and stood in front of her. The familiar purple fragrance lingers in your nose. Fan Kinjao only heard someone say to her, "Ayao, I will take you away." Subsequently, her body became airborne. Beyond the ruins, there is a bright light. The people kneeling on the ground just watched His Highness the Crown Prince walking out with Qingping in his arms. Hua Yuelian's collapsed mood was already fluctuating. Seeing that Yu Yaer was safe, she actually fainted. Seeing that Fan Kinjao's clothes were in tatters, the princess of Heshuo County quickly took off her coat and wrapped it around Xiao Kinjao's body. Looking at the dirty little face, tears blurred her vision again. "Ping and just be fine, just be safe." Fan Kinjao looked at the tears on his adoptive mother's face and comforted him softly, "I'm fine, but it's my adoptive mother." Before he could finish speaking, he fainted from exhaustion. Blood, so much blood. I don't know who shouted, and everyone realized that Fan Kinjao's ankles were already wet and red. The princess of Heshuo County was really frightened. She raised her hand to cover her mouth, feeling anxious and distressed. Such a serious injury, even a man cannot bear it, but Xiao Kinjao not only persisted in not making a sound, but also thought about comforting her. Bailey Fengming frowned and hurriedly hugged Fan Kinjao and got into the carriage. "Go to Yiyang Sai Hao Mansion." The drunkard standing in the crowd looked at the carriage driving away in the distance, his heart aching with jealousy. In the carriage, Bailey Fengming hugged the thin man in his arms tightly. Even though he knew he had arrived in time, his eyes still hurt from the drops of blood running down his ankles. Xiao Xian, who was riding in front, arrived at the western suburbs mansion first. Miss Kinjao was seriously injured and fell into coma, which instantly exploded everyone in the mansion like a cannonball. Hua Yaoding and Fan Zhao and others hurriedly walked towards the door of the mansion. As soon as they stepped out of the threshold, they saw Bailey Fengming getting out of the carriage holding the unconscious Fan Kinjao. Hua Yaoding clenched her fists and hurriedly stepped aside to make way. "Madam has already started to prepare medicinal materials and silver needles. I would like to trouble your highness to send Xiao Kinjao to the yard first." Bailey Fengming nodded slightly and walked quickly towards Fan Kinjao's yard. Fan Zhao looked at his master who was covered in blood under his skirt and his face turned pale. He didn't know who he heard say, "It would be great if the Ji Yuan of the Taiyuan hospital was there." Fan Zhao didn't know Ji Hongliao, but before he left, he didn't forget to take the boy who was talking to him with him. Knocked on the door of Ji's house, Fan Zhao led his men and rushed in. After asking the boy who was the judge of Ji's house, he grabbed his collar and walked out. Ji Hongliao was shocked and angry at the same time. How could such a bold bandit dare to rob homes in broad daylight? Fan Zhao didn't have time to explain, so he just said, "I am the nurse of the Hua family. My master, Miss Kinjao, is seriously injured." Ji Hongliao was stunned, and quickly called to Ji Yuz, "Go get my medicine box and follow me." Fan Zhao walked so fast that Ji Hongliao felt his neck getting tighter and tighter, and his breathing became less and less. When he finally arrived at the western suburbs mansion, Tao Yuxian was already checking Fan Kinjao's injuries. The entire ankle was smashed into the flesh by the falling beam, and the bones were cracked. Ning'an was so scared that she sat paralyzed at the door and couldn't even cry. Ji Hongliao took the medicine box handed over by Ji Yuz and went to the front to discuss with Tao Yuxian how to remove the broken branches from the beam. After quickly finalizing the discussion, he immediately ordered the servants in the yard, "Hurry up and heat the hot water. The more the better good." Bailey Fengming quietly exited the room and stood at the door, her fingers under her sleeves clenched so tightly that she couldn't feel anything. When Tian Yu, who came in a hurry, saw the scarlet color on the prince's white robe, he was so frightened that he almost knelt on the ground. "Third sister, third sister." Mu Yan and Xiao Yan also came one after another, looking at the busy scene in the yard, their faces turned pale and their whole bodies were trembling. Several daughters-in-law came after hearing the news, but when they saw that there was no room for anyone in the yard, they all hurriedly went to the yard next door to take care of the unconscious Hua Yuelian. The princess of Heshuo County stood teetering on the steps with a big belly, obviously almost unable to hold up. Bailey Fengming stretched out his hand to help the princess of Heshuo County. "Xiaoxian, send the princess of Heshuo County back to her home." The princess of Heshuo County wanted to stay, but she knew that staying would only become a burden to others. "So, I will trouble His Royal Highness to stay here. If you get any news, please send someone to inform him." Bailey Fengming nodded and put the arm of Princess Heshuo into Zixuan's hand. Jiyo stepped out and stood beside the prince seemingly casually. Looking at the hurried figures in the room, he said with a half-smile, "It seems that the emperor has really decided." Bailey Fengming looked calm and turned a deaf ear. In the room, Tao Yuxian only raised the hem of Fan Qingjiao's skirt and trembled in shock. Ji Hongliao, who was roasting scissors, looked over in surprise and was so shocked that he almost dropped the scissors in his hand. This is end of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 254. Chapter 254. I want to marry you, serious and stubborn. When Fan Qingjiao woke up, it was already 2 hours later. Beside the bed, one could still see my grandmother's hands covered with blood, my master who was carefully bandaging her wounds, and my grandfather who was standing aside with red eyes, unwilling to even blink. When they saw Fan Qingjiao open his eyes, several people in the room breathed a sigh of relief. There were too many things to say, but considering that now was not the time to talk, Tao Yuxian and Hua Yaoding simply told them to come back later, and then went out to visit their daughter. Ji Hongliao was so angry that he just looked at that pale little face but couldn't bear to scold him. He raised his hand and hit the dirty forehead hard, and snorted angrily, "That's nonsense." Only then did he carry the medicine box and angrily walked out the door. Ning'an walked into the door with shaking legs, holding back her tears and said softly, "Miss, His Highness the Crown Prince is still outside. Do you need me to say no and let His Highness the Crown Prince leave first?" Fan Qingjiao slowly propped up his body and sat on the edge of the bed. "No need, please invite him in." Bailey Fengming walked in, looking at the face as white as a piece of paper, and her heart ached. Fan Qingjiao looked into his distressed eyebrows, but his heart was still. "Sit down." Bailey Fengming stood on the same spot without moving for even a minute. Fan Qingjiao curled his lips and smiled. The emperor set up the situation and later asked His Highness the Crown Prince to come to help. Since His Highness the Crown Prince came so timely, how could he not know about it? She could not think of anyone who could make Tang Yunxiazu collapse in an instant, and who could make the owner of Tang Yunxiazu not hesitate to destroy a century-old reputation and customer base, except the disgusting man in the palace. Bailey Fengming knew that this matter could not be hidden from Ayao, and he had no intention of hiding anything. "Father, I need you to trust me completely." Fan Qingjiao nodded. "If I guess correctly, after I completely believe you, the emperor will plan to kill me with your help. The savior will repay him with a spring of water." In order to let Bailey Fengming go smoothly on the way to Xianbei, Emperor Yongchang did not hesitate to do this to lure Fan Qingjiao into a trap, so that Fan Qingjiao could completely dispel his guard against Bailey Fengming. "If it's not me today, there will be others. I'm afraid that the emperor did not ask you to come with so many troops today." The reason why you are so grand is because you want to let the people in the city know that I am seriously injured. It is so easy to persuade me to stay in the main city and give up the idea of going to Xianbei. But Ayao doesn't seem to be what I want. Bailey Fengming sighed almost inaudibly, feeling a little helpless. She was so smart that even he had to take 3 steps back. While on the carriage, he checked her injuries specifically. It's heavy but not fatal, and it won't shed so much blood. At that time, he knew that Ayao had thought of everything and started planning the charter. This trip to Xianbei is full of swords, mountains, and seas of fire, but I still want to go through it. The day she didn't meet her uncles, the day she couldn't tell her uncles what she was thinking, the day her uncles would continue to live a miserable existence. She can wait, but her uncles cannot wait. Besides, the man has murderous intentions. Even if she escapes this time, there will be another time. It would be better to take the danger out. If she really misses, at least the rest of the Hua family can be protected from being implicated. Bailey Fengming guessed that Ayao was so determined and must have already thought of a way to deal with his father. It's just that if she didn't say anything, he wouldn't ask. He completely knows what she has experienced than anyone else, and the word believe is how difficult it is to Ayao. A strand of broken hair fell in front of Fan Qingjiao's eyes, blocking her sight. But before she could raise her hand, a familiar scent came from the shop. Bailey Fengming raised his hand and carefully tucked her scattered hair behind her white ears. His eyes fell on her lips that were pale due to excessive blood loss. Ayao, don't be afraid. I won't harm you. Just like when I want to marry you, I will be serious and persistent from the beginning to the end. The deep voice blew into the ears, with a slightly sultry ending, burning Fan Qing's heart. The roots of distant airs. Fan Qingjiao has never been able to trust Bailey Fengming wholeheartedly, but he still can't help but feel moved in his heart. After a long while, she said softly, I understand. Bailey Fengming's expression became more and more gentle, but he knew that he could not stay any longer. Ignoring the fingers, he carefully covered her with a quilt before turning around and leaving. Etc. Bailey Fengming stopped. Fan Qingjiao shouted to the door, Ninggan, give Yinqiao hemostasis powder to His Highness the Prince. Hearing this, Bailey Fengming lowered his eyes and smiled, then stepped out of the door. When the prince left, the Hua family gathered around him to see him off. The 3 youngest daughters of the Hua family took advantage of their grandfather to be polite to His Highness the Crown Prince and quietly sneaked into the 3rd sister's yard. Looking at the weak 3rd sister on the bed, the 3 little girls cried and formed a ball. Fan Qingjiao looked at the sisters who were crying in front of him and comforted them softly, it's okay, just practice for a while and you'll be fine. Of course the daughters of the Hua family knew that the injury was far away from the heart, but when they thought of Fan Qingjiao's appearance when he was carried back by the prince, they couldn't help feeling frightened and scared. Fan Qingjiao looked at the sisters in front of him with clear eyes, you came just in time. Now everyone in the main city knows that Qingnanzai is the Hua family's shop. In this case, Qingnanzai will slowly withdraw from everyone's side from now on. Now that my brother is running freight, I don't have to worry about the supplies. I have scouted out the location in nearby Linkhung and want to find someone to take over. You can discuss it while I am away. Qingnanzai's money-making speed is so amazing that although the emperor cannot be allowed to know that the Hua family has no money, he cannot be allowed to know that the Hua family is too rich. Furthermore, once the uncle secretly train troops in Huaishang, the required materials and money will never flow from Qingnanzai's accounts, so she must spread her shops in other cities. Muyan and Tianyu really thought carefully about whether they were suitable. The smile was with his head lowered, his eyes unclear as to what he was thinking. You're not even going back to sleep, so what are you doing here? Hua Yaoding's voice suddenly sounded at the door. The little girls of the Hua family were so shocked that they came to their senses instantly. While their grandfather and grandmother both entered the door, the 3 little girls had already disappeared. Tao Yuxian saw no one around, so he scolded, "Xiao Qinjiao, you are so ridiculous." Just now, she and Ji Hongliao saw clearly that 3 silver needles were buried in the heading point on Xiao Qinjiao's leg. Because of this, the injury that would not have caused a hemorrhagic collapse caused the bleeding to continue. "Since the emperor wants to hurt me and make me afraid, I just show it to him now. I am afraid that the people all over the city will know that her injury is serious." Fan Qinjiao raised his head and looked at his grandfather. "I will go to court tomorrow and ask my grandfather to tell the emperor my determination to go to Xianbei." Hua Yaoding frowned. "Xiao Qinjiao, are you asking for credit from the emperor?" Now everyone in the city knows that Princess Jingping was seriously injured while saving Princess Heshuo, and now Fan Qinjiao has taken the initiative to go to Xianbei regardless of the injury. It's so obvious, what else is it if it's not an invitation to take credit? Fan Qinjiao did not hide anything, and said with a faint smile, "I want my mother to marry in a glorious way." Hua Yaoding and Tao Yuxian were stunned on the spot. Who would have thought that Fan Qinjiao would take advantage of the trend so much to clear his mother's name? That night, the story of Princess Qingping's bravery and fearlessness in protecting Princess Heshuo became known throughout the city. After some discussions between the Princess of Heshuo County and the King of Heshuo County, she also knew that Xiao Qinjiao was deliberately building momentum. While the people were discussing the matter in tea houses and taverns, they even sent servants from the county prince's palace to spread the news. This matter reached a climax. Early on the next morning, Hua Yaoding once again expressed to the emperor that Fan Qinjiao was willing to be injured and go to Xianbei, so that he could live up to the emperor's trust and responsibility. The Minister of Household Affairs, who had always worshipped Fan Qinjiao as the god of wealth, burst into tears when he heard this. Zhou Chun, the Minister of Etiquette, has been in a daze since he learned the truth about the marriage banquet. He was afraid that Fan Qinjiao would think that he was a group of people who tried to frame and plot against the head of Rong'an County, so he would settle the accounts. Now he finally caught a man who patted Fan Qinjiao on his horse. Given the opportunity to fart, Zhou Hunza did his best to take pictures. Emperor Yongchang was sitting on the dragon throne with his head covered with dark clouds, and there was almost lightning and thunder. After Fan Qinjiao became a general, he also held the title of Princess Jingping. Once he died in the main city, the matter would have to be investigated by Zhou of Dali Temple. The biological brother of Princess Heshuo was the Shaoqing of Dali Temple. Even if he could do something about it, if everyone else is silenced, this matter will eventually reach the ears of the Princess of Heshuo County. Emperor Yongchang has come to this day step by step, and he will never let a little person who dies without regrets draw a stain on his title of heroic name. Furthermore, Princess Jingping went on an envoy to Xianbei. If something happened on the way, Xianbei would not be able to escape the blame. And Xianbei wanted to quell Ziliang's anger, so he could only increase the stakes in paying tribute to Ziliang. However, Fan Qinjiao was smart, restrained and sharp. In order to make him trust the prince wholeheartedly, Emperor Yongchang planned the collapse of the house, so it was better to pave the way for the prince to kill him secretly. Result: Fan Qinjiao was not dead yet, but he had already collapsed the house with him. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 255. Chapter 255, The Three Colors Are Pomegranate, and the Great Fortunes Gather. Facing the civil and military forces of the Manchu dynasty, Emperor Yongchang had no choice but to reward him. Just giving money to Fan Qinjiao means using the national treasury. It is absolutely impossible for Emperor Yongchang to invest gold and silver in a dying person. But Fan Qinjiao is already the princess. If he continues, wouldn't he become a princess? Xianbei and Ziliang are getting married, and the person they are marrying is just a princess. How can he be able to make the princess commit himself to accompany him? Ziliang loses his face? He, as an emperor, has no face at all. After much thought, Emperor Yongchang simply left the matter to Baitu and asked Fan Qingjao to take the initiative to ask for the reward. In the western suburbs mansion, the grey-faced Fan Qingjao sat on the bed, looking at Baitu standing in front of him, knowing it well but pretending to be tactful. It is my duty to save my stepmother, and I must do it when traveling to Xianbei. How can I be rewarded by the emperor if I am a trustworthy person? Please tell Mr. Ming that Fan Qingjao does not need a reward. Fan Qingjao thanks Mr. Bai in advance. Fan Qingjao turned over and was about to kneel on the ground. Bai too was worried and flattered at the same time as he stretched out his hand to help her, only to find that the wrist he held was as thin as a bone, and was shaking violently due to weakness. Princess Jingping can't do this, the servant is just helping to convey the message, and the emperor, it's because Princess Jingping values that I feel rewarded. If Princess Jingping refuses, I'm afraid it will break the emperor's heart. It happened that Hua Yuelian walked in with the support of Ninggan at this time. Fan Qingjao seemed shy and said, "What I am most worried about before leaving is my mother's life events. However, my mother always feels that she is not worthy of a good marriage, but it's difficult for Master Sun Che to show his deep affection." Hua Yuelian, who was about to enter the house, heard this and felt ashamed on the spot. Bai Tu looked at Hua Yuelian, then at Fan Qingjao, and then smiled knowingly. "I understand, Princess Jingping can rest in peace." Fan Qingjao looked at Ninggan as if he was extremely weak. "Ninggan sends Mr. Bai to you." Waiting for Ninggan to accompany Bai Tu out of the yard, Hua Yuelian walked to the bed helplessly and distressedly. Her daughter is still seriously injured, but she still remembers that she is her daughter. How can she have any dignity? Fan Qingjao held her mother's hand, with a soft smile on her face. "My daughter will get married sooner or later. She cannot stay with her mother all her life. She must have someone who can depend on her." My daughter is relieved. After this incident, it is enough to see that Uncle Sun cares about and values my mother, so my mother should stop hesitating. After experiencing this life and death, Hua Yuelian was also moved by Sun Che's sacrifice of life for protection. "But you haven't found a good match yet, how can my mother be so relieved? It's too early to talk about my daughter's lifelong events. Besides, my mother is still in the main city after remarrying, so it's convenient to see her. I am just a divorced woman, how can I drag Sun Che down for his whole life? When the emperor gives me the title, I'm afraid that Uncle Sun will be the one to surpass my mother. When the time comes, my mother must not despise Uncle Sunday." Hua Yulian had never thought that her daughter had such a naughty side, so she could only sigh helplessly. "You." Fan Qingjao stood up and got into her mother's arms, closing her eyes with peace of mind. "As long as my mother agrees, then she can rest assured even if she never comes back. Sun Che is an upright person with deep feelings. My mother will be happy with him forever. Now, as long as you wait for the canonization that person must give, everything will be fine." Bai Tu returned to the palace to inform Emperor Yongchang of Fan Qingjiao's intentions. "Your Majesty, you haven't seen that Princess Qingping's thin little face is no bigger than a palm, but she keeps denying that she can't bear the reward from the emperor. It was only after the slave coerced and lured her for a long time that Princess Jingping asked for the reward." Bai Tuyi, thinking of Fan Qingjiao's filial piety, his eyes turned red. Emperor Yongchang was completely relieved after hearing what Bai Tu said. Although the prince has performed well recently, he has to let the prince secretly collude with Fan Qingjiao, and then join hands to put on a show for himself, in an attempt to hide the truth. "Go and call the Minister of Rights." "Yes, I'll go right away." Early the next morning, Bai Tu came to the western suburbs mansion again with the imperial edict. 3 colors are pomegranate, and great fortunes gather. Sun Ce, the governor of the main city of Dadu, has served as an official for 6 years. He has good integrity and good moral character. He started in the Hanlin Academy. He heard about the Qing dynasty and reached the court and the public. He practiced through the Ming dynasty. He is loyal and honest. He has no wife in the recent years. He is the daughter of Hua Yaoding. Yulian, the daughter of a noble family in the main city of Dadu, is well behaved and well behaved in etiquette. The two of them are destined to have a perfect match. Today, they are decreed to be married. The Hua family is granted the title of Yid, and is given a title, service, and regulations. Hua Yulian, who was once Fan Xia's wife, was granted the title of Madame Jiaoming, and the emperor decreed that the marriage should be given to Sun Che, the governor of the main city. In an instant, the news spread throughout the main city. While the people were shocked by how quickly the situation changed, they had to remain silent about the words Hua Yulian. Hua Yulian was once kicked out of the house by Fan Mansion, and even if she reconciled with her afterwards, she was still a concubine, but now the emperor has re-established a title for her and made her an imperial edict. Anyone who questions Hua Yulian again is questioning the current emperor. Inside Fan Mansion, Zy Ling had just heard the news about Su Hong's pregnancy, and was so angry that she didn't know what to do. She saw the maid who was waiting next to her hurriedly entered the door and said, "Madam, the emperor has decreed that Hua Yulian, the daughter of the wedding florist family, will marry the lord the governor of the city, Mr. Sun, granted her the title of Lady Jiaoming, and now the news has spread throughout the main city." Zy Ling didn't even lift it up and fell onto the chair, almost losing his breath. With his eyes darkened and his ears ringing, Zy Ling, who was extremely jealous, stared blankly at the increasingly dilapidated mansion, murmuring and repeating, "The emperor granted me a marriage and a royal decree." After learning the news, Sun Che personally brought people to Hua's house that day and filled the yard with generous betrothal gifts. The flower house is decorated with lanterns and colorful decorations, full of joy. The younger daughters of the Hua family couldn't wait to surround Sun Che one by one to ask for red envelopes. Although the two elders of the Hua family were happy that their daughter had finally found a good home, they thought that this marriage was bought by Xiao Qinjiao with his life, and they felt bitter in their hearts. That night, Sun Che stayed for dinner. Before Hua Yulian could speak, Sun Che took the initiative to kneel in front of the two elders of the Hua family. "My son-in-law has a merciless request. I hope my father-in-law and mother-in-law will tolerate my son-in-law for a while. When Princess Jingping returns safely from Xianbei, my son-in-law will choose a good and auspicious day to marry Yulian in a sedan chair. He will grow old together with the hand of one person in his life, and he will never take a concubine to welcome a child." Hua Yulian didn't expect that Sun Che could guess what she was thinking, and her eyes were red. The second elder of the Hua family subconsciously looked at Xiao Qinjiao sitting next to his daughter, not knowing how to answer. Fan Qinjiao hugged his mother and said half-jokingly, "In that case, Uncle Sun will have to wait for a long time." Sun Che blushed and said, "Yes, it should be." Fan Qinjiao then looked at his grandfather and grandmother, and nodded gently. The adoptive mother acted as a matchmaker and the emperor granted her a marriage. Even if she really left and never came back, the marriage was inevitable. At that time, she only hoped that Sun Che could comfort her mother and help her regain her life as soon as possible from the gloom. Tao Yuxian could see Xiao Qinjiao's calculation at a glance, and he almost choked up and choked. Hua Yaoding suppressed the rolling pain in his heart, held his wife's hand tightly, and secretly reminded, "Yulian's upcoming marriage is a great event. My wife has been dignified all her life, so she must not lose her sense of propriety in front of the younger generation." Tao Yuxian squeezed her husband's strong hand and swallowed all the soreness in her chest. "Sun Che, we believe in you only when we trust you with our daughter. Our Hua family does not ask you to truly be a couple for one person for the rest of your life, but please have a clear conscience and stand upright." Sun Che glanced at Fan Qinjiao, who didn't even blink when he forced himself into the palace, and wiped the sweat from his forehead. "My son-in-law is still going to die." Tao Yuxian burst into tears and laughed when he saw this. The rest of the Hua family looked at the old lady and smiled, and they also burst into laughter. It was the 10th day of May, and it was still dark. Everyone from the Hua family was already standing in front of the mansion. Today is the day when Fan Kinjao goes to Xianbei with his army. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 256. Chapter 256 Farewell Without Complaint. Ningtian and Nanny Su helped Fan Kinjao, whose foot injury had not healed, out of the yard. Ninggan hugged Ta Shui and followed beside them. Lanja, Yuoluo, and Peng Jing walked at the end. Ninggan begged all the way, her eyes red from crying, "Miss, just let me follow you, so that I can take care of your daily life on the way." Fan Kinjao smiled and shook his head, "If you leave, who will take care of Taxiu?" "But..." "Okay, the young lady has already spoken, so don't bother with her." "Ninggan, you are becoming more and more unruly." Suyan interrupted Ning Hanyu's tongue, for fear that she would no longer quarrel, and she couldn't help crying. At the entrance of the mansion in the western suburbs, the carriage sent by Bailey Fengming has been waiting for a long time. The Major General, who had been invited in by the Hua family for tea, had just stood beside the carriage. When he saw Princess Jingping coming out, he quickly asked the palace servants to open the carriage door and set up the horse stool. Hua Yuelian took Fan Kinjao's arm from Nanny Su's and helped her down the steps. She kept giving endless instructions, as if she couldn't finish them all. Fan Kinjao looked at his mother, who was rarely talkative, and responded one by one. When Fan Kinjao got on the carriage, Hua Yuelian reluctantly let go of her clenched hand. Tao Yuxian's eyes were already red. If it weren't for Hua Yaoding's tight support, he would have been unable to stand still. "Xiao Kinjao, you must come back safely." Fan Kinjao clasped his hands, closed his eyes and smiled, "It's a long journey ahead, so I hope my grandfather and I will take care of ourselves." Tao Yuxian's heart trembled and his eyes turned redder. Fan Kinjao was afraid that he would also be unable to control himself, so he raised his voice and ordered, "Let's go." The carriage moves forward, its wheels rolling. Fan Kinjao finally couldn't help but lean on the car window and look back. He saw everyone at the door of the mansion with tears streaming down his face. His grandmother was lying in her grandfather's arms and her shoulders were shaking, and his grandfather was looking at her with tears in his eyes. Fan Kinjao couldn't bear to look any further, so he forcibly withdrew his gaze and sat in the carriage. After this separation, there may be no hope of seeing each other again. She hates that time is not waiting for her, and she will never be able to avenge her shame and pay for her debt with blood. But she was thankful that she had made up for the shortcomings within her ability. At a quarter of the yin hour, the city gates opened wide, and 1,000 marchers stood in order. The prince's carriage was at the front, and the carriages of Luqian and Princess Yunan were behind. As Fan Kinjao's carriage arrived at the city gate, the soldiers at the city gate blew the horns, and the large group of people stepped out of the city gate and headed for Xianbei under the rising sun that had just penetrated the clouds. The loud horn woke up the sleeping people. When the people belatedly remembered that today was the day when Xianbei left the main city, they all cheered. As long as Ziliang and Xianbei get married, Ziliang and Xianbei will no longer fight, and they will no longer have to worry and worry all day long. The cheers of the people resounded throughout the main city. Everyone in the western suburbs mansion finally stopped crying when they heard the shocking cheers. Tao Yuxian first suppressed the sadness in his heart, turned around and said to everyone at the door, "Everyone, go back." Everyone nodded and turned around. Only the second daughter-in-law Chanyu looked at the empty street and couldn't regain her senses for a long time. Tianyu saw the carriage parked in the alley opposite. He told his mother to come back later, and while everyone was walking into the mansion, he quietly slipped into the alley opposite. Ji Yuz, who had no idea that he was being followed, saw that Fan Qinjiao had left, so he ordered the driver to go to Jingshui Tower. He came today just out of pure curiosity. Unexpectedly, he was shocked by the courage of a woman. The whole city knows about the marriage banquet. If you show your sharpness, you will be killed. With Fan Qinjiao's intelligence, how could he not know that the emperor had murderous intentions towards her? But she was able to move along with the tide rationally and calmly, and planned to pave the way for everyone. A strong person goes with the flow, a wise person uses strength to gain strength. Consider the overall situation, know the general situation, know how to advance and retreat, and understand the choices. Fan Qinjiao. She is really a strange woman. If this person were a man, I don't know what kind of storm he would cause in Ziliang. Master, we're here. The coachman's voice interrupted Jiya's thoughts. Jiya stepped off the carriage and entered Jingshui Tower. Jingshui Tower, which is located near the water, means to be close to the moon in the tower near the water. It is a common place for the dandies in the main city to gather. The private room on the second floor is now filled with many dandies from the main city. As soon as Jiya entered, he was pulled by the dandies to sit among them, pushing cups and changing cups. At this time, Jiya lost his composure in front of the prince and became more cynical. The prince has not yet entered politics. If he is found to have a conspirator around him, it will probably arouse the emperor's suspicion and displeasure. Moreover, the dudes in the main city are the most well-informed. Such a hangout can not only hide Jiya's identity of working for the prince, but also allow Jiya to grasp the news in the main city at the first time. It can be said that it kills two birds with one stone. Bang, the door was suddenly pushed open. The force is great and the sound is loud. The originally bustling private room fell silent for an instant. The dandies in the room looked at the young girl standing at the door in shock, unable to recover from the shock. Even Jiya was startled when he looked at that not-so-familiar face. Miss Fourth. Tianyu walked up to Jiya angrily, snatched the wine cup from his hand and threw it to the ground. I thought you were an elegant and graceful person, but I didn't expect you to be such a small-minded person. Even if my third sister has your heart, you can't sit here with a bunch of idiots and get drunk. The dandy present. Who is the mud? Say, who are you talking about? Today is on me. You all have a good time. I'll take the first step. Jiya stood up with a splitting headache, pulled Tianyu, and walked out. Tianyu was here to teach Jiya, but he didn't struggle. Jiya pulled Tianyu downstairs and opened an additional private room. He breathed a sigh of relief when he closed the door. Tianyu frowned and held the chair next to him. What do you want to do? Jiya looked at Tianyu, who was tensing up as if facing a formidable enemy, and smiled lightly. You even dare to kick the door of a dandy in the main city, but now you are afraid. Tianyu coughed awkwardly. Jiya sighed and spent a long time organizing his words before explaining, I don't have feelings for Princess Jingping between men and women. If you really want to say that I have feelings, I'm afraid it's just admiration and respect. Besides, it is not something that ordinary people can do if they want to marry Princess Jingping. Just like the majestic crown prince. Aren't you still running on the road and never to return? Tianyu was stunned for a long time before he couldn't believe it and said, Are you lying to me? Jiya was helpless. Why did I lie to you? Tianlu. Is there a crack in the ground? She really wants to drill it? Jiya looked at Tianyu, who looked like he had a tomato on his neck. He smiled and said nothing more without mercy. He asked the driver to hitch a carriage and send Tianyu back home. Tianyu ran out of the private room almost as if he was running away. Jiya lowered his eyes slightly and saw a piece of jade pendant falling from Tianyu's body. He hurriedly got up to pick it up, but when he got up and wanted to hand it back, Tianyu had already disappeared. Tianyu returned to the Zaizu mansion in a carriage bearing the name of the Ji family. Fortunately, everyone in the mansion was still immersed in the sadness of Fan Qingjiao's departure, so no one paid attention to her. Just in time for lunch, Tianyu suppressed the panic in his heart and hurried to the front yard. In the main hall, everyone had just sat down, but there was no smile. Hua Yuelian asked doubtfully, "Second sister-in-law, won't Xiao Yan come back for dinner?" The second daughter-in-law, Chun Yu, tensed up all over. She dodged her eyes for a while and said, She said King Nanzai was too busy today and wouldn't come back for lunch." As soon as he finished speaking, he saw Yu Luo and Peng Jing entering the door. Before Hua Yuelian could ask, Jian Pengjing took the lead and said, "Today I am going to check the accounts of King Nanzai. Since the lady is not here, I can only leave it to the master to do the accounting. Yuoluo and I will be in the accounting room today. Masters, if you have anything to do, go to the accounting office." Hua Yuelian was even more suspicious. "Second sister-in-law, you snapped." Tao Yuxian slapped the chopsticks in his hand on the table, looked at his second daughter-in-law Chun Yu and asked coldly, "Chun Yu, you have been uneasy since Xiao Qinjiao left today. What are you hiding from? What else are you avoiding, not telling the truth?" The second daughter-in-law, Chun Yu, shivered and knelt on the ground. Facing her always majestic mother-in-law, the second daughter-in-law Chun Yu could no longer bear it and said, "Old lady. Smile, smile at her." End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 257. Chapter 257, Killing People and Killing People's Hearts. Hua Yulian saw that her second daughter-in-law Chun Yu's face was not good, and she hurriedly bent down and touched her trembling shoulders. "Second sister-in-law, don't panic, what happened to your smile?" The second daughter-in-law, Chun Yu, gritted her teeth and kowtowed to the old lady. Then she couldn't help but said with tears streaming down her face, "Xiao Yan is going to Xianbei with Xiao Qinjiao." Tianyu and Weian were shocked on the spot. When the third daughter-in-law Peihan and the fourth daughter-in-law Yafu heard this, they dropped their chopsticks in shock. Tao Yuxian tensed up suddenly. "What did you say?" That day, Xiao Yan said she was going to the main courtyard to pay her respects to the old man and his wife. My daughter-in-law didn't think much about it. Unexpectedly, when Xiao Yan came back later, she knelt in front of her daughter-in-law and threatened to follow Xiao Qinjiao to Xianbei. "Xiao Yan, the decision has been made, and my daughter-in-law can't stop it." The second daughter-in-law, Chun Yu, did not dare to tell Xiao Yan what she heard in public, let alone tell her in public, but why couldn't Tao Yuxian hear it? "I'm afraid that what she and the master said to Xiao Qinjiao that day were all heard by the Smile." The Smile was uneasy and asked Xiao Qinjiao to carry everything by himself to Xianbei, and only then quietly followed. How much determination does it take to accompany Xiao Qinjiao even when he knows he is dead? Hua Yuelian asked in shock, "How did the Smile disappear? When did it disappear?" The second daughter-in-law, Chun Yu, kept sobbing, "Just today, when the guards came in to drink tea, Xiao Yan tied herself with a hemp rope and tied herself under the carriage, saying that she was waiting for an opportunity where no one would be around. Meet Xiao Qinjiao." Tao Yuxian's chest heaved and his eyes filled with tears. Since Xiao Yan knew that going to Xianbei was a narrow escape, and even Xiao Qinjiao was not sure of escaping unscathed, she still insisted on following him. She wanted to blame Xiao Yan for adding chaos out of thin air and acting arbitrarily, but those words came to her lips. "I can't even say it." "Second sister-in-law, don't panic, I'll send someone to bring Smile back now." Although Hua Yuelian didn't know that Xianbei was dangerous, she didn't want Smile to suffer along with Yu Yaer. The second daughter-in-law Chun Yu, who has always had no ideas or opinions, held Hua Yuelian's hand this time and said, "Don't let her come back. Since she already knows how to make a decision, just let her go." The second daughter-in-law, Chun Yu, is always reluctant to let go, but she has to be cruel. Xiao Qinjiao has been walking against the wind for the Hua family until now. How often has he not swallowed the pain silently into his stomach? Although she is not as big as Xiao Qinjiao, she still understands the meaning of the 4 words repaying kindness. Besides, Xiao Yan is always thinking about Xiao Qinjiao's safety. If Xiao Qinjiao comes back safely, that's it. If Xiao Qinjiao is serious, even if Xiao Yan is alive, she is afraid that she will die with her. The second daughter-in-law, Chun Yu, thought about this and gritted her teeth again, saying, she will make her own choice, and there is no need to bother others. Hua Yuelian looked at the old lady helplessly, "Mother." The old lady's throat rolled, and then someone called the wolf Fang over. This time we went to Xianbei. Although the prince was in charge, there was also a third of Xianbei's accompanying troops. If the smile is accidentally exposed midway, even if the prince wants to save his life, Xianbei will make a big fuss about it. At the worst, Xianbei used this to threaten Xiao Qinjiao alone. Most importantly, Xianbei directly informed the emperor of the matter. With a large army accompanying them, if a female family member mixes in, no matter what the reason, they will be punished by death. Soon, Lanja walked into the main hall silently. Tao Yuxian suppressed the worries in his heart, looked at Lang Yat and warned, "Get out of the city quickly, find the team heading to Ziliang and Xianbei as soon as possible, find an opportunity to tell Xiao Qinjiao secretly, hide your smile under the carriage." Tao Yuxian did not say how to decide next. The children are older, and she believes they have their own ideas and rights to make choices. Lanja took the order and left, but because of the inconvenience, he made a big announcement. After riding his horse out of the city gate, he abandoned the horse and switched to Qinggong. Along the way, he looked for the traces left by the army on the ground and pursued them cautiously. When an army travels, it's not like having fun. Even if they don't have to travel thousands of miles a day, they still race against time. In his last life, Fan Qinjiao secretly helped Bailey Rong's private soldiers in the north refine elixirs to strengthen their bones. He traveled with the army for a long time, but now he doesn't feel depressed or tired. The carriage where Bailey Fengming and Lu Gan were sitting was also unusually quiet. Only from Princess Yunan's side, the sound of motion sickness and retching could be heard from time to time. Princess Yunan has been accustomed to pampering herself in Prince Rui's mansion since she was a child. She has never been so busy, and now she is sitting in a carriage holding a spittoon and vomiting. The more she thought about it, the more she felt aggrieved. Princess Yunan simply threw away the spittoon in her hand, leaned against the car window and shouted arrogantly, "Stop! Stop everyone! I want to rest, do you hear me?" The army moved forward in silence, and no one paid heed to Princess Yunan's proposal. Princess Yunan angrily smashed the car window and screamed, "Are you all deaf? I am Princess Yunan of Ziliang. When I get to Xianbei, I will be the third princess of Xianbei. How dare you treat me now? If you're disrespectful, aren't you afraid that I'll take your heads?" Lin Yi rode up to the prince's carriage and frowned. "Before leaving, I saw the prince standing beside Princess Yunan's carriage and whispering." It seemed that the prince had often exaggerated in front of Princess Yunan. Otherwise, why would Princess Yunan rely on Xianbei to step on Ziliang? Bailey Fengming flipped through the book in his hand without even raising his eyelids. "I'd like to trouble the feudal king enough to divert Princess Yunan's carriage to Xianbei's team." Lin Yi was stunned for a moment, then nodded and said with a smile, "I'll do it now." Not long after, the carriage carrying Princess Yunan was driven by soldiers. It moved to Xianbei's team, and happened to be next to the carriage where the feudal prince was. For a time, the two carriages were driving side by side. The strong wind was mixed with the shouts and curses of Princess Yunan, and wave after wave floated towards the carriage where the feudal prince was sitting. The vassal king, who wanted to provoke Princess Yunan to fall out with Ziliang and give the Xianbei people some fun on the road, was so noisy by Princess Yunan's screams and curses that he had a splitting headache and turned blue in the face. Lugan, who was sitting on the soft couch, gently lifted the curtain and looked towards the carriage at the front. All knowledge about the Ziliang prince comes from the evaluation of the third prince of Ziliang. 'Tis timid, has no independent ideas, and is embarrassed to take on big responsibilities. But Lugan felt that His Highness the Crown Prince was not as unbearable as the third prince of Ziliang said. Fan Kinjao, who also raised the curtain and looked at Princess Yunan's carriage, had dark eyes like water and flashing thoughts. Killing people will destroy the heart, and 100 steps will pierce the yang. If such a person really plots against her, even Fan Kinjao is sure that he can escape unscathed. Touching the jade pendant hanging around his neck, Fan Kinjao sat on the soft couch and closed his eyes to relax. From the beginning to now, Bailey Fengming has spoken openly and has nothing to hide. However, it is hard to disobey the emperor's order. If Bailey Fengming really lets her go, how can the selfish and despicable man in the palace let Bailey Fengming go? Faced with imperial power, people's hearts are sinister. This is the deep understanding that Fan Kinjao gained at the cost of his life. So for Bailey Fengming, she still couldn't believe it. At a quarter of an hour, the army, which had been marching for a day, set up camp to rest. In order to encourage the soldiers to continue moving forward tomorrow, Bailey Fengming specially asked Lin Yi to go to a nearby village to buy cattle and sheep. Half an hour later, the bonfire was lit, and the smell of barbecue was mouth-watering. Lugan personally took his bow and arrows and led the Xianbei army into the woods, and soon he shot and killed a lot of prey. Not long after, Xianbei soldiers took the initiative to come outside the camp where Bailey Fengming and Fan Kinjao were staying, claiming that Xianbei was hosting a banquet in the main camp, hoping that the Prince of Ziliang and Princess Jingping would show their respect. Fan Kinjao's black eyes flashed lightly, and his heart was like a bright mirror. I'm afraid Xianbei is a drunkard who doesn't care about drinking. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 258. Chapter 258. The smile is missing. Fan Kinjao struggled to support his injured calf and walk steadily to the entrance of the tent. As a result, as soon as the curtain was lifted, Lin Yi was seen standing outside. Lin Yi said truthfully, I am ordered by His Highness to take Princess Jingping to the main camp. Fan Kinjao originally wanted to ask someone to refuse the banquet, but after hearing Lin Yi's words, he changed his words and said, the prince went to the banquet. Lin Yi nodded. Fan Kinjao was heartbroken. The marriage alliance between Ziliang and Xianbei looks calm on the surface, but in fact there is still turmoil in the depths of the water. The prince of one country escorting the prince of another country back to the main city is already condescending. It seems that if the emperor was not eager to take action against her, he would definitely not let Bailey Fengming accompany him to Xianbei. No emperor, no matter how stupid and incompetent, can do it to destroy his own prestige and enhance the prestige of other countries. Moreover, Ziliang and Xianbei have always been on par. But for Lugan's invitation, Bailey Fengming agreed, so. I'm afraid it's not just Lugan who is a drunkard who doesn't care about drinking, but Bailey Fengming also has other motives. With thoughts on his mind, Fan Kinjao took the initiative to hand his hand to Lin Yi. Prescribe the right medicine to cure the disease, know yourself and the enemy, and you can fight 100 battles without danger. Fan Kinjao couldn't miss any opportunity to understand and figure out Bailey Fengming. Only in this way, if Bailey Fengming really stabbed her weak point with a knife, she could take precautions in time. Being on guard against others is indispensable, she learned this through her life. In the camp, the flags were flapping in the night wind. The soldiers drank and sang, drank heavily, and ate large pieces of meat. It was a joyful and lively atmosphere. In the stable, Smile, who had been hiding under the carriage, listened to the deafening sound in the camp, and couldn't bear it any more and untied the rope that had been wrapped around him. He fell heavily to the ground, his Smile was grimacing in pain, he carefully climbed out of the carriage and looked at the huge military camp. For a moment, he didn't know where to look for his third sister. Just when Xiao Yan quietly walked out of Mopeng and wanted to fumble in the direction of the camp with the Ziliang flag printed on it, suddenly a long knife was placed on Xiao Yan's neck from behind. Where did this little thief come from? Smiley looked back cautiously, and when he saw the markings on the soldier's armor, his hands and feet felt cold. The main camp tent is brightly lit. Bailey Fengming sat in the main seat, and Lu Jian and the vassal prince sat at the bottom. As soon as Lin Yi supported Fan Qinjiao and walked in, Lu Gan said with a faint smile, "If I remember correctly, this major general seems to be a close confidant of the Prince of Ziliang." Lin Yi took the initiative and said, "Princess Jingping is injured, and my subordinates are just following orders." The vassal king smiled sarcastically and said, "I didn't expect His Royal Highness the Crown Prince of Ziliang to be a compassionate person, but that's true. Princess Jingping is so beautiful that even Princess Yunnan can't compare to her." Bailey Fengming seemed to be sulky and put down the wine cup in his hand. What Gu hates the most is women who are noisy and talkative. But even if Gu is a prince, it is difficult for him to interfere with Xianbei's affairs, so I will invite the third prince of Xianbei tomorrow. Thank you very much for persuading Princess Yunnan. The vassal king's expression flickered. Princess Yunnan is from Ziliang. I heard she is the daughter of the Ziliang emperor's younger brother. Bailey Fengming smiled at Lu Gan seemingly flatteringly. The declaring of troops to seize the master is the work of a villain. Since my father is at ease and has left Princess Yunnan in the care of Xianbei, Guzi will not show off in front of the third prince of Xianbei big. Such flattery and self-degradation would make Emperor Yongchang so angry that he would vomit 3 liters of blood. Fan Qinjiao looked at the lifelike expression on Bailey Fengming's handsome face, as if he had to endure humiliation engraved in her bones. Even she couldn't help but feel bursts of contempt and disgust in her heart. Lu Qian carefully studied Bailey Fengming's expression for a moment before he opened his mouth and smiled. "I am very proud to have the Crown Prince of Ziliang pay such attention to me." Bailey Fengming followed and smiled, raising the wine cup first. Fan Qinjiao, supported by Lin Yi, sat opposite Lu Qian. Facing the vacillation between Bailey Fengming and Lu Qian, his face was calm and indifferent, as if it had nothing to do with him. Today, Bailey Fengming quietly moved Princess Yunnan's carriage to the Xianbei team, which probably aroused Lu Gan's suspicion and ideas, so Lu Gan set up this banquet as a test. This proves that Bailey Rongs and Lu Qian colluded secretly and had a deep connection. Otherwise, how would Lu Qian know that Bailey Fengming's character and style are not consistent and set up the situation? Fan Qinjiao could see through Lu Gan's move, but he couldn't guess Bailey Fengming's intention. The roasted sheep on the bonfire outside was already ripe, and the soldiers cut it into small pieces and brought them to the people in the main camp. The soldier kneeling next to Fan Qinjiao didn't know whether he was afraid or something, but when he was placing the plate, he accidentally knocked over the wine pot and cup on the low table. "The little one deserves to die, the guilty one deserves to die." The soldier crouched on the ground and begged to move around in fear. For a moment, everyone's eyes turned this way. When Fan Qinjiao heard the soldier's voice, her fingers suddenly clenched into fists, but soon she loosened her fists again, looked at the soldier and said, "No problem." With his words falling, he bent down to pick up the wine cup and flask that fell to the ground. When the soldiers saw this, they were even more frightened and trembled. They hurriedly stretched out their hands to pick it up. "I don't dare to bother Princess Jingping." Seemingly too panicked, Fan Qinjiao even snatched away the wine cup that Fan Qinjiao had already picked up. Just when the two people's hands collided, the soldier quickly wrote a few words on Fan Qinjiao's palm, and then placed it respectfully on the low table before bending and exiting the main camp tent. Fan Qinjiao felt the disappearing warmth in his palms, and his heart suffocated. She had already heard that the man pretending to be a soldier was Lang Ya, so how could she not understand the message left by Lang Ya? "The second pursuit is missing." The youngest daughters of the Hua family are ranked according to size, and the second one is Smiling. Chasing but not seeing. Smile followed the army, but Lanja, who followed closely behind, could not find Smile. Fan Kinjao's chest shook and he felt numb all over. Once the army discovered that the female family members had infiltrated, they would have reported it to them. But now that they are sitting here, they can still hear the laughter of the soldiers in the camp. How can it be that they have discovered signs of uninvited guests? Unless the person who took away Smiley had no intention of making any noise. 100 miles of Phoenix. Lugan. Which one of them is it? Fan Kinjao suppressed the tremor in his heart and raised his head steadily, only to meet Lugan's sinister eyes. Their eyes met. Luqian first raised his lips and smiled. What's wrong with Princess Jingping? Fan Kinjao calmly took a sip of tea and said, the Third Highness of Xianbei is worried too much. Lugan looked at Fan Kinjao and smiled lightly, seemingly inadvertently, but in fact, his eagle-like eyes were always staring at Fan Kinjao's hand holding up the teacup. Seeing that Fan Kinjao's arms were steady and his fingers were relaxed, showing no sign of tension, he withdrew his gaze. A Xianbei soldier suddenly walked out of the camp. When Fan Kinjao saw the soldier walking towards Lugan, he squeezed the wine cup in his hand again. The feudal king's drunken brows fell on Fan Kinjao's clenched fingers, and he suddenly sobered up a little. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 259. Chapter 259. Something worse than chaff. Fan Kinjao was aware of the feudal king's gaze, but he had no intention of relaxing his body. If it was really Xianbei who captured Xiao Yan, she would have to save Xiao Yan even if she completely tore the face apart. Just as Fan Kinjao was thinking quickly and one plan after another to keep his smile flashing in his mind, the soldier stood next to Lugan. I would like to report to Your Highness, Princess Yunnan, that she is not feeling well and will not come to the banquet. Lugan didn't like Princess Yunnan at all, so he waved his hand nonchalantly after hearing these words, let her go. The soldier nodded, turned around and walked out of the camp. It was not like he had anything else to say. Whether the Xianbei soldiers really didn't notice the smile, or the news didn't reach Lugan, as long as there is no public smile for the time being, the smile may be safe. Disappearance means there is still hope to be found. At this moment, Fan Kinjao hoped that someone from Bailey Fengming would capture Xiao Yan. At least if Bailey Fengming was really hiding evil intentions, she would be the only one he wanted to kill. But this person is cunning, despicable, and shameless. If his smile falls on his hands, he will probably die. Seeing the soldiers' backs disappear from the camp, Fan Kinjao's already tense body tensed to the limit. Because she didn't notice that the Lord's eyes were always on her. Although the vassal king was not as shrewd as Lugan, he also noticed something strange about Fan Kinjao. He rolled his eyes and looked at Lugan with a half-smile and reminded him, Your Highness, why do you think this Princess Jingping of Ziliang? The vassal king is stupid, but Lugan is smart. If the vassal king told Lugan what he had just seen, Lugan would have noticed Niduan with his sharpness. Fan Kinjao clenched the teacup in his hand again. If you want the feudal king to shut his mouth, there is only one way now. At the same time that his thoughts had settled, Fan Kinjao raised the teacup in his hand and threw it at the feudal king. Click. The teacup filled with tea broke into pieces in front of the lord's toes, and the scalding hot tea splashed on his ankles, causing the lord who was sitting firmly on the futon to bounce up. Princess Jingping of Ziliang wants to murder this king but she can't, the vassal king's eyes widened in anger. At the same time, the Xianbei troops who were still singing in the camp rushed to the main camp tent. Almost instantly, the sword was drawn and the crossbow was drawn. Xianbei people are arrogant and bloodthirsty by nature, and they dare not act rashly in the territory of Ziliang. But now that they are out of Ziliang's jurisdiction, they no longer restrain themselves. This Princess Jingping is not like a royal relative, let alone a hereditary minister. Now that the vassal king is the first to attack them, what's the matter even if they hang her on the spot? Does Ziliang still want to break up with Xianbei over something worse than chaff? Ziliang will never break the superficial harmony with Xianbei. Otherwise, the major generals in Ziliang would not be standing far away at this moment without anyone coming to help. In the last battle at Huaishang, the old generals who swore allegiance to the Hua family were killed or injured. Even if they returned alive, they have all retreated outside the military camp. Emperor Yongchang took the opportunity to incorporate fresh blood into the military camp and completely eliminated the Hua family from the Ziliang military camp. To put it bluntly, in the eyes of these Ziliang major generals, the so-called Princess Jingping is just a pretty girl who is putting on airs and relying on the miserable Hua family to survive. What is it about being alone and forced into a palace, or what is about filling military pay? Everyone inside and outside the main tent was tense to the limit. Although Lu Qian didn't know what happened, he quietly swept towards the main seat when something happened. Bailey Fengming was drinking and drinking as usual, not showing any signs of alertness. That self-satisfied and leisurely look has the cruelty and indifference that should be in the royal blood, and also has the aloofness hidden in the bones under the deliberate pandering. It was as if he was sure that even if something happened, the soldiers of Ziliang would not ignore him. If Lu Gan had only half believed Bailey Fengming just now, now he completely believes that Bailey Fengming is a selfish, cowardly, and secretly arrogant villain. However, Lu Gan, who completely withdrew his eyes from Bailey Fengming, did not know that Bailey Fengming's determination was not from the former elite soldiers from outside, but from Fan Qinjiao, who was slowly getting up at this moment. His Ayao never acts recklessly. Fan Qinjiao stood up in the dead silence, his black eyes as dark as a deep pool. In the battle at Huaishang, Ziliang, won a complete victory. For the sake of the two countries, Ziliang, are willing to accept Xianbei's goodwill and marry Xianbei. I don't think Xianbei is secretly conceited and arrogant, but Xianbei is really okay. The vassal king frowned and glared. What do Princess Jingping mean by these words? I am hosting a banquet today in Xianbei, and I treat Princess Jingping as a distinguished guest. However, Princess Jingping has said these words now. Isn't it a bit ungrateful? Just now, I really believed in Xianbei's sincerity, but now I find it extremely ridiculous. Fan Qinjiao had a faint sarcasm in his eyes, and raised his chin slightly. Since Princess Yunnan is married to Xianbei, she is the third prince's concubine of Xianbei. Now Xianbei is hosting a banquet. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince and I both stayed at the hotel to celebrate despite the fatigue of traveling and traveling. The third prince's concubine of Xianbei refused to come forward because she was tired. The third highness of Xianbei is even more conniving in public. It's okay for the third prince and concubine of Xianbei to be indifferent to others. However, the third highness of Xianbei is so conniving at the absence of his own princess. But he doesn't look down on me, or looks down on me as the crown prince, or looks down on me. Ziliang can't afford it? Lu Qian frowned slightly. He never thought that Fan Qinjiao would insist on etiquette. He was indeed careless. The vassal king frowned and said again, Princess Yunnan is from Ziliang. Our third highness attaches so much importance to Ziliang. Doesn't that mean we attach importance to Ziliang? Today at the gate of Ziliang city, the vassal king was still trying to instigate Princess Yunnan to submit to Xianbei. Now when something goes wrong, he is pushing the blame on Ziliang. The vassal king has a mouth as clever as a pen. You. The vassal king was furious, and his clenched hands rattled. He wished he could split Fan Qinjiao in half right now to relieve his hatred. Fan Qinjiao looked at the vassal king and sneered, in troubled times, the winner is the king and the loser is the bandit. This is an eternal truth. Since Xian Bei was defeated, he should show the attitude of a defeated person. Instead of sneaking around under our noses in Ziliang, since I, Ziliang, can beat you Xian Bei once, I will win a second time. If Xian Bei wants to fight again, I, Ziliang, will accompany you to the end. The feudal king was so beaten that his heart ached. Today at the gate of Ziliang city, he only instigated Princess Yunnan to help Xian Bei give some eye drops to Ziliang. However, during the day, with a wave of His Highness the Crown Prince of Ziliang's hand, he was subjected to Princess Yunnan's evil spirit. The sound had been ringing in my ears for a whole day, and now I finally had a drink, but Princess Jingping wouldn't let go. What evil has been done? The soldiers of Ziliang, who had never planned to meddle in other people's business, looked at Princess Jingping's high spirits in the main camp tent and listened to her resonant words. They felt that the blood in their whole bodies was burning with all their strength, and they wished they could rush into the main camp right now. Camp, follow Princess Jingping and point your sword at Xian Bei. Especially the major generals, who had never fought against Xian Bei but had already heard of Xian Bei's war name. Even though Xian Bei was a defeated country this time, they were instinctively afraid of Xian Bei and gave in. This is why hundreds of Xian Bei soldiers are so arrogant and dare to block the main camp. It was Xian Bei who was standing outside the main camp tent with the marching army, and suddenly he felt a burst of cool air behind him. When they looked back, they saw that the Xian Bei soldiers, who had nothing to do with them, had already grasped their swords, and were staring at them eagerly in the night. In the main business account, Fan Qinjiao said loudly, I was ordered to go to Xian Bei as a senior official accompanying the army. I am not someone Xian Bei treats with contempt, so I won't accompany you. After saying that, he bowed to the prince, turned around and left. Bailey Fengming smiled faintly and raised the wine cup first. Princess Jingping was born in a general's family, and her sharp words made her the third highness of Xian Bei and the vassal laugh. Lu Gan took advantage of the opportunity to raise the wine cup and drank it all in one gulp. The vassal king wanted to continue the verbal dispute, but with his peripheral vision he glanced at the Xian Bei soldiers who had wrapped up the Xian Bei entourage outside the main camp tent. He could only wipe the cold sweat from his forehead guiltily and sat down on the donkey ground down the slope. In the main tent, the banquet continued. The soldiers who were blocking the main camp tent also released their swords and left one after another. After 3 rounds of drinking, Lu Gan seemed to have thought of something, and suddenly asked the vassal king softly, just now the soldiers came to report, but did you find anything unusual about Princess Jingping? End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 260. Chapter 260 I am so envious and jealous. The vassal king once again thought of the way Fan Qinjiao clenched the wine cup just now, his fingertips turning white. It's just a piece of chaff, what's the abnormality? Faced with Lu Gan's question, the vassal king shook his head. Just now, he did suspect that Princess Jingping's behavior seemed too nervous, but now that he thought about it, he was afraid that it was due to extreme anger. Otherwise there wouldn't have been such a fuss in the main camp. To put it bluntly, it was because of my status that I was compared to Princess Yunnan, and I felt unbalanced. When Lu Gan saw what the feudal king said, he didn't ask any more questions. Lin Yi saw Fan Qinjiao limping out of the tent and was about to step forward to help him when he saw a soldier walking over first. He seemed to be extremely excited and said, Princess Jingping was so powerful just now. I admire you so much. Please allow me to help Princess Jingping return to the camp to rest. Fan Qinjiao looked calm and said, I'm tired. Seeing this, Lin Yi had no choice but to take back his steps. Turning around and looking towards the camp, the Ziliang soldiers who had given in to the Xian Bei marching army had completely straightened their backs. Although they did not have a head-on conflict with the Xian Bei marching army, the high righteousness exuding from their bodies was something that Xian Bei's marching army did not dare to touch. Just a few words can inspire soldiers to have such momentum. Princess Qingping's words. It really makes people envious and jealous. Because Ziliang's soldiers were in high spirits, Xian Bei's marching army was not as indulgent as it was just now. Seeing Princess Qingping walking in front of her, Xian Bei's entourage didn't even dare to take a second look. Fan Qinjiao walked out of everyone's sight, but did not return to the military camp. Instead, he was helped by the soldiers to the stable. Lanja, who was pretending to be a soldier, had regained his original voice. "Master, this is it." Fan Qinjiao walked into the stable and slowly squatted down in front of the carriage he was riding in. As expected, he saw the messy ropes scattered under the carriage. Under the firelight, clear blood stains could be seen on the wrist-thick rope, and some places had even been worn away. This shows how much hardship Xiao Yan has suffered along the way. Waves of unspeakable soreness hit his throat. Fan Qinjiao gritted his teeth to restrain the pain in his heart. Lanja lowered his voice and said cautiously, "My subordinates are incompetent." When they arrived, there was no trace of the second young lady. There were chaotic footsteps at the entrance of the stable. It was impossible to tell which way the second young lady left, let alone figure out where the second young lady was. Should I leave alone, or? Fan Qinjiao was shocked. Go back to the camp immediately. If Xiao Yan really leaves here safely, she will definitely sneak into the camp where she lives. With the last glimmer of hope, Fan Qinjiao returned to his tent. However, the tent was cold and dark, and there was no one at all. Fan Qinjiao squeezed both hands tightly, his eyes almost splitting. The smile was indeed taken away by someone. Lanja lowered his head in self-reproach. "When the soldiers rest, I will search carefully. I will definitely." Before Lang Ya could finish what he said, Fan Qinjiao interrupted directly, "No. Now there are not only elite soldiers from Ziliang but also Xian Bei troops in this military camp. Once you are exposed, the entire Hua family will be implicated. If someone discovers that the subordinates of the Hua family are exploring the military camp without authorization, the emperor will definitely kill everyone in the Hua family to eliminate suspicion. The Hua family has just climbed onto the driftwood. Their desires are unstable and they cannot afford to gamble." Fan Qinjiao took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. The flower family must be protected, and the smile must be saved. There can be no chaos. I have my own rules regarding smiling faces. You should hide among the elite soldiers of Ziliang first. If anything happens, I will tie a handkerchief on your wrist. Remember. No matter what happens to me, as long as I don't see my signal, you are not allowed to act without authorization." With the Hua family on top and the smile on her face, her safety already seemed so insignificant. Besides, she had already prepared to die before embarking on this journey. Lanja followed Hua Yaoding for half a year and obtained Hua Yaoding's true biography. Now he is just lurking in the army to hide his identity. It is not difficult for him. Fan Qinjiao extinguished the candles in the tent as Lang Ya left. In the darkness, she stood by the window and held her breath, staring in the direction of the main camp tent. In the main camp tent, Bailey Fengming and Lu Gan were exchanging cups with each other. Lu Gan was exhausted, but he still sat at the seat to accompany him. Seeing that Bailey Fengming was drunk and blurred, he asked people to remove the banquet and asked Lin Yi to come in and help Bailey Fengming leave. Before returning to Xian Bei, he had one more important thing to do, hoping that one less pair of eyes would be staring at him. Even if that person is timid, arrogant, and incompetent, he should not take it lightly. As soon as Lu Gan returned to the camp, he saw someone touching his desk. He stretched out his hand vigilantly and swept away the inkstone on the desk, and a letter was clearly revealed. He picked it up and read it quickly, and a sarcastic smile appeared on the corners of his tightly pursed lips. The third prince from Ziliang is really impatient. But the time is almost up, and it's time to start preparing. There was suddenly a loud noise in the camp. Lu Gan heard the sound of footsteps approaching from far away, and quickly threw the letter in his hand into the candlestick, and then walked out of the camp pretending that nothing happened. Looking towards the noisy distance, Lu Gan frowned and asked, "What happened?" Xian Bei, who was guarding outside the camp, reported back with the marching army, "I heard that the prince of Ziliang couldn't stop vomiting. Ziliang was worried that the prince's body could not bear it, so he went to call Princess Jingping for diagnosis and treatment." Trash Lu Gan curled his lips sarcastically and was about to turn around and return to the camp, but suddenly he heard several soldiers running over behind him, panting. "Your Highness, my subordinates have something important to report." Fan Qinjiao, with the support of Lin Yi, entered the camp where Bailey Fengming lived. In the camp, Bailey Fengming was leaning on a makeshift wooden bed, his long eyes slightly squinted, his chest heaving, and his poetic face stained with an unseen flush. "I'm afraid I'm really drunk." Fan Qinjiao approached with the medicine box and probably heard footsteps. Bailey Fengming's voice was stern and sharp as never before. "Who?" "Fan Qinjiao." Bailey Fengming opened his eyes following the sound, and his gloomy eyes softened the moment he saw Fan Qinjiao. It came quite quickly. Looking at Fan Qinjiao walking in front of him, Bailey Fengming sat up slightly. "You drank too much." Fan Qinjiao opened the medicine box and handed over the hangover cure pill that he had prepared. "Only by making a fake show can the fake one be confused with the real one." Bailey Fengming smiled faintly, took the elixir and drank it without thinking twice. Then he closed his eyes again, waiting for the dizzy feeling to gradually disappear. He heard Fan Qinjiao's last words in the main account, and he understood that she had left a secret message. However, Lu Gan was too cautious. If he directly found Fan Qinjiao in the camp, he would probably cause Lu Gan to speculate that Bailey Fengming would simply ignore the world and use drunkenness as an excuse. His slightly cold little hand reached into Bailey Fengming's sleeve, and when his fingertips touched his wrist, Fan Qinjiao's voice also sounded, "My second sister secretly hid under the carriage and followed the army, but I was outside. The people sent by Xiu never found her." Bailey Fengming opened his eyes again, his drunkenness had mostly subsided. "Do you suspect it's me?" End of this chapter.